everybody, welcome to the Horror Movie Syllabus. I'm Professor Victor, and today we're talking horror movies about baseball. If you're new to the channel, you... Hey, everybody! You're a vampire. What do you want? You'll never grow old, Professor. You'll never die. But you must feed. Awesome. What? Yeah, let's do this. You understand that you would have to eat people. Huh? Aren't you a vegetarian? Yeah, but, I mean, it's eternal life. So that's a no, then? Call me. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you are new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good sense of what we're all about here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. But in short, what we do is we pick a particular subgenre of horror, and then we examine 3 movies from that subgenre. And today, at long last, what we're talking about are vampire movies. I have been wanting to do this for a long time because, quite simply, vampire movies are some of my favorite. I love the vampire. I love the mythology. I love the aesthetic. I love the stories. And there are a ton of vampire movies to talk about. There are good vampire movies. There are really bad vampire movies. And I tend to kind of like them all. It's a rare day that I really loathe a vampire movie. My tolerance level is high for schlocky vampire movies. But that's not what we're actually focusing on today. Today we're focusing on really good vampire movies because this subgenre has a lot to choose from, a lot of really quality movies, a lot of really good representations of vampires. And you've probably, if you've been watching the Horror Movie Syllabus, seen vampire movies popping up in other subgenres. And if you continue to watch, you'll keep seeing that happen because, as I said, I like vampire movies. So I tend to sprinkle them through other subgenres when I can fit them in. So spoiler alert, you're not going to see Let the Right One in this video because we already talked about it. And I was able to squeeze it in somewhere else on the syllabus. And for those of you that have been with us here at the syllabus, you know how it works. We can't repeat movies in different subgenres. So if I've used it once, I can't use it elsewhere. And I really want to get as many vampire movies as I could that I love onto the syllabus. So that's how that worked out. Now, I'm not the only one who loves vampire movies. They're really, really popular. They've been popular for quite literally 100 years back in the old days with the Universal monsters and with Dracula. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's not something that just caught on with Twilight, which is, again, will not be on this video because we talked about it already. But it's a mythology that I think is very rich and has a lot of interesting pathos and sex appeal, quite frankly. And I think that's what draws people in. I think that's why the vampire fan base tends to be rather rabid, no pun intended, of course. I guess I'd make a better pun for the werewolf video that we're going to do next week, but I digress. Yeah, I think that people just find the vampire alluring. And I think that translates into a lot of the stories about that vampire allure, that draw that they have, kind of in a supernatural sense, but also just in a regular, sexy, mysterious, edgy, bad boy kind of sense. The vampire endures as an attraction. And that translates into, a very passionate fan base. And I would count myself one of them. As I noted, there's a ton of vampire movies to feed this audience. And like I said, they run the gamut from being really terrible and cheesy to really, really good. And I think that, again, reinforces the richness of the mythos. You can have some really, really dramatic and poignant stories using the vampire as a a motif or an analogy or an allegory, or you can just play it straight, and both work quite well, actually. I won't go into Buffy the Vampire Slayer too much because I do it all the time, but the whole show is literally a metaphor using vampires to explain adolescence and growing up and the hardships you face as becoming an adult. So that's just one example of how the vampire mythos can be used to delve into deeper themes and deeper ideas. So there's a lot to unpack in a lot of these movies. We're not going to get too deep into it because the other part of it is vampire movies tend to be fun. I mean, it's a monster that sucks your blood and never grows old and never dies. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. Let's stop prattling on. You guys know what the vampires are. You know what they're about. So let's get into this. As usual, we're gonna rank the movies in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. And in this case, we're looking at them in the level of scariness, or at least the level of which I think that they're scary. Because I know that scariness is kind of a subjective thing, but I'm gonna go with my level of scariness for these movies. So with that, let's just sink our teeth into these vampire movies. The first vampire movie we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys came out in 1987, and it's frankly one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Not favorite vampire movies, one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love this movie. I'm not alone. It's super popular, super quotable, super memorable. And for a whole new generation that hasn't seen it yet, I'm very excited for you to be able to check it out. But if you haven't seen it yet, the movie is about a recently divorced mother and her two sons and their beautiful dog that moved to Santa Carla, a coastal town in California, a fictional coastal town, that to get a new start on life and kind of start fresh. And hopefully the boys will get acclimated and the mom will find work and everything will be fine. And it probably would be if it wasn't for all the damn vampires. And that's where we'll leave it for now, because if you haven't seen it, I definitely don't want to spoil it. But if you haven't seen it, why haven't you seen it? The Lost Boys is an iconic film. It's one of those movies that's in the pop culture zeitgeist. It's not just something that's a horror thing. You'll hear lines from the movies, or you'll see like gifs and memes from the movie without even necessarily having seen the movie or knowing anything about it. It pops up, and I think it's just because it hit that hard. Like, it comes out in the late '80s, and I'm preteen when this movie comes out. I'm like 12 years old, and man, this movie really resonated. This movie hit really hard. It had a little bit of something for everybody. It had like the sex appeal for the older kids and maybe the younger adults. It had some adult characters, dealing with real world problems. So the older audience, people that were maybe close to middle age or middle age could kind of connect with that there. And it had, one of the protagonists is an early teen boy, and so everybody's got something to latch on to in terms of age ranges and things to identify with. So it really works for everybody. But the big thing about it is it's just cool, and I'll be honest, like, it was cool in 1987, and I imagine, the Gen Z people watching it now will look at it and kind of think it's hilarious. The styles, the wardrobes, and the music and stuff like that. I think the music still slaps. I think it holds up pretty good. But I think that people will maybe find it kind of dated, but I think in a charming way, not in a groan worthy way. I think that people will smile at it. I think it'd be kind of fun. Everybody thinks the mullet's a hilarious haircut these days, but man, it sure works on Kiefer Sutherland, doesn't it? Like, he looks cool as hell in this movie. And that's another thing. The cast of this movie is top notch. You've got Kiefer Sutherland. You've got the Coreys, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, huge stars in the '80s. You've got Jason Patrick, an excellent actor, who went on to have, not the biggest career because he kept doing challenging work, but I digress. He's just a great actor. Jamie Gertz, who I think every guy my age has a little bit of love for Jamie Gertz, for basically because of this movie, or maybe because of Less Than Zero, but that's out of scope for the syllabus. It's got just great Edward Herman. If you're a Gilmore Girls fan, you got to check this movie out to blow your mind. And Diane Weiss, like, the cast is just across the board really, really great, very memorable. Everybody's bringing an A game. People are funny. People are heartfelt. Like, everybody's just good in this movie, and the characters are largely well-rounded. Even the ones that don't get a lot of screen time, the other vampires that aren't really fully fleshed out, and many of them don't even have a name. They're memorable. They have a memorable look. They get a memorable scene. They get a moment in the movie. Director Joel Schumacher did a really good job of balancing that out and making sure that everybody in the movie had their moment to shine or their moment to do something memorable. And it works really well to kind of endear you to everybody in the movie. And Joel Schumacher is an interesting one because he's mostly maligned for destroying the Tim Burton Batman franchise. He made Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, and pretty much was vilified for that. But people forget he made The Lost Boys. So I can never really hate him because he made The Lost Boys, and I absolutely love this movie. The movie, it moves. It's got a lot of fun stuff. It's always got something funny or scary or action packed going on to keep you going. So the movie really works at a very good clip. It never drags. It never gets slow, and it's having fun. Ultimately, the movie is fun. I put it here as an undergraduate because it's not super scary. It's got its scary moments, and obviously your personal tolerance for scariness differs from person to person, but I would say that most people are going to be able to roll with the Lost Boys pretty well. You're not going to struggle too much with the scary stuff or the gore. You're going to have a good time. It's a good ride. Like I said, there is scary stuff in it, but it's always like a bit of a joke somewhere or some action or something like that to kind of ease off the tension a little bit. It's just a fun ride. It's the funnest ride. I absolutely love the movie, as you can tell. I'm effusive about it. I'm ecstatic about being able to talk about it. Uh, it was very popular, and as a result, there were sequels. But surprisingly, the sequels came way later, way later, and didn't really involve most of the main cast except for Corey Feldman. I think Corey Haim he might have passed away by that point, or maybe he was still alive for the first one. I don't remember. I'll be honest with you, the sequels not great. And honestly, they're not as bad as everybody says. People tell you how terrible they are. They're not terrible. They're mostly forgettable. As evidenced by the fact that I'm not really remembering the plots from so much. But so you can skip the sequels, just stick with the original. The original is a classic for a reason. I'm going to go ahead and say bona fide classic. I'm going to say if you're watching any kind of vampire movie, you should have seen The Lost Boys. It's something you should have to see for your horror education, and you won't be sad that you did. It's a good time. It's a lot of fun. It's done really well. It's shot well. It's acted well. The story is laid out really well. It's a fun story. It's an interesting story. It's a great time. If you've seen it, you already know what I'm saying is true. I'd be shocked if anybody had a differing opinion or a dissenting opinion, but by all means, leave it in the comments below. Maybe you don't love it the way I do, but I can't imagine somebody hating Lost Boys. But if you do, leave your comments down below and we'll talk about it, and I'll be polite, don't worry. But if you haven't seen Lost Boys, finish this video first and then go and check out Lost Boys. You're going to have a fun time. It's going to be a blast. And it's hard to pick a better vampire movie for universal appeal. There are better vampire movies in terms of quality and story and stuff like that. Let the Right One Win would be maybe one of the ones I would think of. But in terms of universal appeal, I don't think anything beats The Lost Boys. The next vampire movie we're talking about, the graduate level selection, is Interview with a Vampire. Interview with a Vampire came out in 1994 and is a gorgeous movie tackling one of the more complex vampire series of novels, the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. And is it successful? I'd say yes, but I'm not necessarily in the majority on that one, but we'll get into it. If you haven't seen the movie, it takes place in late 1700s in Louisiana and sometimes Paris and sometimes modern day San Francisco. And it involves a vampire named Louis telling his story about becoming a vampire to a reporter. And he shares the whole history of becoming a vampire, the vampire exploits that he went on with his companions, all the havoc they wreaked, and basically kind of his lamentation or sorrow for the things that he's done. And it's a very interesting take on the vampire mythos. But I don't want to get too into it because I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. Suffice to say that Interview the Vampire is an ambitious film, again, based on an ambitious series of books. And it is trying to take a different approach to the vampire mythology by making it an actual mythology that could be shared that has been kept secret. So the idea is that the vampires have, for years and years and years, kept themselves secret and haven't revealed themselves to regular humans, and now there's a vampire who is threatening to break that code and tell the story. And that's a neat take. That's an interesting angle, a fresh angle, in my opinion, for the vampire mythology. This idea of sharing the story with a reporter and trying to get the story out there, in part because you don't love your life anymore. You don't love being a vampire. You kind of want to maybe atone for what you've done, or you just have this kind of deep depression or lamentation, and that's kind of Louis' character in a nutshell. He's just a depressed guy, played by Brad Pitt, and played rather well by Brad Pitt, actually. I think he's quite good in the movie. Now, he's there because at the time he was a sex symbol heartthrob, and he's pulling that off in the movie with his long, beautiful hair and his eyes and everything. But he gives a good performance, and I like Brad Pitt, so I think that I'm on the side of him being good in this movie. I know that opinions vary on this, but the real opinions vary on Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise plays the vampire Lestat. And at the time, that was big news for a number of reasons. The first of which was, Tom Cruise playing a purely villainous character, just pure evil, a monster, quite literally and figuratively. But also because if you've read the Vampire Chronicles, which I have, or at least I've read many of them, Tom Cruise physically does not match the description of Lestat at all. Lestat is tall, thin, pale, and blonde. None of those things describe Tom Cruise. And Jack Reacher fans probably have a similar feeling about this, frankly. Tom Cruise was physically horribly miscast. And I remember this being a big issue for Anne Rice fans in particular, because the Anne Rice novels have a very passionate fan base. And my ex-wife was one of those people, was really, really into the books, which kind of made me really into the books. And so she had a visceral reaction to Tom Cruise being cast, and she was not alone. This is pre-internet, so there was no internet rage on this. It was internet wasn't a thing, social media wasn't a thing. Internet existed, but social media wasn't really a thing. And so it was really just kind of like media, regular media, kind of reporting on how people were unhappy about this. And I remember she was refusing to see this movie, even though she was super excited about there being a Vampire Chronicles movie. And I used to work in a movie theater at the time, and so the trailer for this movie came out, and it's an incredible trailer. And I made her watch it. You need to check out the trailer. And the trailer was so good. She was like, all right, I'll give it a chance. And it was interesting because Anne Rice had a similar reaction. She did not react well publicly when Tom Cruise was cast. That's part of what fueled this media storm. And then she saw the movie and backed off of it, because Tom Cruise is really, really good in the movie. Again, physically, he doesn't quite look the part. I mean, they make him blonde, which looks a little weird, but he doesn't quite physically impose the way the character is supposed to. But man, he gives it his all. And as you guys know, I'm a Tom Cruise fan. I think he's a good actor. His personal life aside, I think he's a really good actor. And I think he pulls it off. I think he pulls it off really, really well. I think he's both charming and creepy, which is what he needed to be. And I think he nails it. Antonio Banderas, Christian Slater. The cast is phenomenal in this movie, but the person who steals the show, the person who makes the movie, the person that even people who don't really care for this movie or think it's overrated will agree is fantastic, is Kirsten Dunst. I think this is her first major film role, and she is phenomenal. She plays a child that gets turned into a vampire, and then ages, mentally, emotionally, but not physically. So at some point, she is an adult woman trapped in the body of like an 11-year-old child. And it's fascinating. And her performance is amazing. She's playing this full-grown adult woman, a middle-aged woman, and as a child, and she is brilliant. I'm a big Kirsten Dunst fan, and it starts right here. She blew me away. Just in the trailer alone, she blew me away. She's so good. This is the hardest role to pull off in the book, and they pulled it off amazingly well. Kirsten Dunst deserves so much credit for this movie holding together, because without her, this movie falls apart. Her character is pretty key, and this movie would have been comical if it wasn't done well. The movie's directed by Neil Jordan, who is a really visionary director. people can debate his career. You can look up his filmography and see, I think he's quite good, but his eye is fantastic. Now, people can talk about the pacing of this movie. There are some pacing issues. It can be a little bit slow. So can the book, frankly. Because it's an epic book. It's spanning years, decades, centuries, and so the movie kind of follows suit. It's fairly accurate to the book. But Neil Jordan's visuals are something that nobody complains about. Like, the movie just looks sumptuous. It looks wonderful. It's gritty and dirty when it needs to be. It's epic and majestic when it needs to be. It's dark and moody and mysterious when it needs to be. Like, he knows how to frame a shot. He knows how to light something. He knows, or maybe it's his people, his cinematographer and his DP and everything like that. But I'm going to give Jordan the credit. He made a movie that's beautiful to look at, and I happen to really love the story, and I think the performances are great. So for me, it works extremely well. It hits the sweet spot. For those of you that care, it did win my ex-wife over. It seemed to win over most of the Anne Rice fans. I think there's probably still a few people that dug in their heels about Tom Cruise and everything, but it seemed like most people were really down with it, really interested in it. Really, it won them over. So I think that it was a success overall in general. It was a hit. I do understand. I think opinions vary on this. There are people that really love it. There are people that don't particularly care for it. I love it. I think it's great. The only thing I'm bummed about is that they didn't really franchise it out. So for whatever reason, even though it was a success, I don't know why. But they didn't ever really follow up. They didn't keep going with it. And it may be as simple as the fact that the next book, The Vampire Lestat, it deals with Lestat during a period of time that is not shown in Interview with the Vampire, where he starts up a rock band, and he becomes like a rock and roll star. And just the concept of that is ludicrous. And so it might be really hard to sell that, especially with Tom Cruise. That said, if you've seen Rock of Ages, where Tom Cruise plays a rock star, don't don't bet against Tom Cruise. He might have been able to pull that off. I don't know. They did actually make a film version of the Vampire Lestat. The movie is called Queen of the Damned, and it's not. I mean, I guess it's kind of a sequel to Interview with the Vampire, but they recast Lestat. They recast everybody. It's not the same actor, not the same director, not the same creative team at all. But it's based on the second book, and it's okay. It's Stuart Townsend playing Lestat. I like him. He's okay. Aaliyah's in there. If you know Aaliyah, that's interesting. She's pretty cool on that. But it's it's okay. It works better than I thought it would. It's it's okay. I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I can see why it didn't take off. They were clearly trying to reboot the franchise, and it didn't happen, and I can see why. It's kind of on the cheap. It doesn't have the same vision behind it. It's sort of wrote except for the story. The story is just so bizarre and out there. And does it work? Yeah, I think it does. Like, I think Stuart Townsend is believable as kind of like a gothy industrial rocker, but I don't know. It's good, but it's not great. And so I really wish that the original team. I wish Neil Jordan could have stayed with it. I wish Tom Cruise would have stayed with it. Brad Pitt, and really kind of hammered out a few of the books. But alas, we didn't get it. We just got the one. So I just kind of savor that one because I really do like it. I think it's a good adaptation of the book. I think that the characters come off really well. Like I said, people have complaints about the characters in the movie. I think that's kind of how they are in the book, frankly. So if you're an Anne Rice fan, I'd like to know what your opinion is on this movie, assuming you've seen it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What about it for you doesn't work? Are you in disagreement with me about the characters? Maybe you are. A lot of people are. But let us know your thoughts on that in the comments. And if you haven't seen Interview with the Vampire, I definitely would recommend it. I don't think you need to have read the book in order to appreciate it. In fact, it might actually take away a little bit from it because the book is very rich, very dense. And so you might just spend the whole movie going, "Oh, well, that's not where's that part of the book? Where's that part?" So it might just be better to watch the movie first. I don't know, but I do think it's a very fresh and interesting take on the vampire mythology. I think that's what makes Anne Rice's books so compelling. She's really keyed into the sexuality and sensuality of the vampires, the mythology and the grandioseness of it, the lore of it, and it comes out in the books really well. And I think this movie maybe only kind of scratches at the surface of that, but does it in a way that I thought was very satisfying. So if you haven't seen it, check it out and let us know what you think. And the last vampire movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is 30 Days of Night. 30 Days of Night came out in 2007, and it's based on the comic book of the same name. And this is a movie that I feel like it should have been a bigger movie and should have endured as a bigger movie, but doesn't seem to have gotten the same kind of legendary status or lore that the other two movies we've talked about has. And maybe there's reasons for that, but let's go ahead and explore it. But before we do, if you haven't seen the movie takes place in Barrow, Alaska, up near above the Arctic Circle, where it gets dark and becomes night for 30 days, which is a haven for vampires because the sun's not going to come up and kill them. And the small town of Barrow, Alaska, has to fend off an assault by a group of incredibly scary vampires, and hijinks abound. Let's leave it there because, as usual, I don't want to spoil things, but I love 30 Days of Night. I think this movie is so much fun and really pretty scary. As I said, it's based on a comic book also called 30 Days of Night by Steve Niles, and I've read the original graphic novel, the original comics about it, and they're quite good. I really like them. They did other series, diminishing returns, but the original series is quite good. And the movie, while I don't think it really follows it super dead on, is pretty good, a pretty good adaptation. It's pretty close, but it really works for me in large part because of the visuals, the movie's visuals, which, while again they don't necessarily mimic the art in the comic, which is also excellent. They're their own thing, but they are equally chilling. In part because it's Alaska, but because the design of the vampires is terrifying. Yeah, we talked earlier about how vampires have this sex appeal. They're sexy, they're mysterious, they're the bad boys and stuff like that. And that tends to be ubiquitous. That tends to be true of almost all, most vampire movies. Uh, Not 30 Days of Night. 30 Days of Night, they are monsters. I mean, they're still humans. They still look like people, but they are monstrous. There's not really anything sexy about them at all, and I absolutely love it. They have their own language they speak that is really unsettling and unnerving. The way it sounds is just, it kind of gets under your skin a bit. But their blackened eyes and their sharp teeth, they look terrifying. They look evil. They look like evil personified, and it's the best part of the movie to me. Made vampires that are absolutely 100% bone chilling, terrifying. If you watch Twilight and were really upset about the sparkly vampires, this movie is the remedy. This movie will get you back on track about vampires. It's absolutely a great idea that they made these vampires vicious and savage and scary, because the whole concept of the movie is you're stuck without help coming, without anybody around to help you, without any sunlight coming up to save you in the morning. You got 30 days of trying to fend these guys off. What are you going to do? And that's a really terrifying concept. And the fact that the monsters are not sexy and wanting to seduce you, but just want to eat you, is really the right way to go with this, because you get that feeling of isolation, which I always like in a horror movie, and it's just like the pressure of it. Like, it's like a savage animal chasing you, and what do you do about this? It works really well to great effect. The other part of the visuals that really make this movie click is that it gets that isolation down pat. It shows you the barrenness of Barrows, Alaska. It really shows you how isolated this little town is, and it films everything really well. The views of the Alaskan landscape are gorgeous, and then the town just feels kind of confined and a little bit like a ghost town. The lighting is just really like kind of washed out and somber, and everything's kind of like almost like shades of gray. It really just has a great look to it. And so then when colors happen, it really pops. The whole atmosphere of this movie works for me really well. The movie feels cold because it is cold. They really convey that feeling, and it just adds to it. It's like almost like you can feel your breath or see your breath while you're watching the movie, and I love it. I absolutely love it. The leads of the movie, Josh Hartnett and Melissa George, both underrated actors who are bringing A games here. They're really good in it. This is the movie that actually made me a Josh Hartnett fan. He, hit the scene kind of being like a heartthrob kind of guy. There more for his a pretty boy, there for his looks more than his skill, but he's good. He's really good, and I think his career, he kind of tried to go away from that, with this and Penny Dreadful. If you haven't seen that, check that out. But I like Josh Hartnett a lot, and I really like him in this movie. Melissa George is always good, and she's good here. But everybody is good. The vampires are, like I said, they're creepy. Everybody's bringing a great A game performance to this, but most notably, the filmmakers, the director, the cinematographer, everybody putting this together, the costumer, the set designer. Good Lord. They put together this movie and made it look incredible. They did such justice to the comic, which again is a work of art, quite literally. The art is fantastic in the comic. The story is fantastic. And they really, while doing their own thing with it, really honored that, and I couldn't be more thrilled about it. Now, the movie was successful enough to have some sequels, but they were like direct to video sequels or maybe a TV sequel. Uh, don't need to waste your time with those. They're fine. They're not a bad time. They're not a waste of time. I guess I shouldn't say waste of time, but they're not essential. They're not necessary. But this one, I kind of feel like it is. Like, I mean, I said earlier, this movie hasn't gotten like the cult status that say a Lost Boys has gotten, but I don't know why, because I think it's a really excellent movie. I'm pretty passionate about it, obviously, but I feel like I'm in the minority on this. I have, a lot of you. We've talked about vampires recently. Our friend Josh here is in Movie Timelines has just done No Vamper. He's been talking about vampires all last month, and this movie hasn't come up all that much, and that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. It doesn't have the same appeal or allure that the other movies do, and I think it's a shame because I think the movies are excellent. I really like the movie. It's one of my favorites, and that's why it made the syllabus. If you have a differing opinion, of course, share it with us. But if you haven't seen 30 Days a Night, if you like vampire movies, definitely check this one out. You should have already. It's a fantastic vampire movie. It's pretty intense, pretty scary. It's a fresh, interesting concept, and I really think it's extremely well executed. So if you like vampires and you haven't seen this, you're in for a treat. And then let us know how you enjoyed the treat. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the vampire subgenre, but you can bet I've got a few extra credit movies for you to check out if you like this subgenre like I do. The first one I'm going to mention is From Dusk Till Dawn. And From Dusk Till Dawn came out in mid '90s, and it's a Robert Rodriguez film. And if you know Robert Rodriguez, he likes his action, he likes his B movie schlock, and this movie kind of has a lot of that on display here. If you haven't seen it, the movie is about two criminals who kidnap or take hostage a family. I think it's a minister and his family, his kids, and they're trying to cross the border into Mexico and escape, and they stop at a strip club slash bar that is full of vampires and hijinks abound, and we'll just stop there with it. But From Dusk Till Dawn is notable for many reasons, but probably the biggest one is because of the tonal shift in the movie. For the first part of the movie, you think you're watching a crime movie. You've got these two criminals and they're taking hostages, and that's what you think it is. And then when you get to the bar and it becomes a vampire movie, it's like it comes out of nowhere. It's like suddenly you're watching an entirely different film. And I kind of wish that I wasn't spoiling that for you. But the fact of the matter is, A, you have to put it in the vampire subgenre, but B, you'd actually see this in the trailer. And it's kind of unfortunate that the trailer tips that off, but I feel like people might not have gone to see it if you hadn't done that. Even though the movie stars George Clooney, at the time George Clooney was not George Clooney yet. And when you watch this now, it's kind of funny to see George Clooney in this kind of movie. George Clooney plays one of the criminals, the other one played by Quentin Tarantino, who did not make this movie. He's just acting in it, and opinions vary on his performance, but he's kind of gross. And let's leave it at that. Trigger warning for people who don't like sexual assault kind of stuff. He's kind of gross. Juliette Lewis is in there, Harvey Keitel. There's a ton of people in this movie, especially like a lot of genre people. Most notably, legendary makeup effects person Tom Savini is in this movie as Sex Machine, and it's as cool as you think it is. It's a lot of fun. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out Salma Hayek in the movie, because she is one of the other most noteworthy and memorable things about this movie. Salma Hayek's performance in this movie is kind of the stuff of legend, and you should see it just for that. She kind of got famous with this movie. This movie kind of made her famous, and for good reason. She is very memorable in this movie. The sex appeal is cranked up to 11. She is alluring and scary, and she's fantastic. The movie's got a lot of things that make it stand out. From the over the top action that is the Rodriguez signature, to George Clooney's performance, to the vampire effects, the quotable lines. There's a lot about this movie that really stands out, and it's been a kind of a favorite for many years as a result. But none of the franchise outside of the first one has really clicked with people, including me. There's a TV show that I haven't even watched. There's a couple of directed video sequels, and they're all, those are fine. I've seen most of them, I think, and they're fine. But the magic of the originals isn't there, and it's hard to say why, other than lower budget, not the same creative people involved, stuff like that. But it's diminishing returns, is what it is, as we usually say. But the original is a blast. It's a crazy ride. It's one of the vampire favorites for a good reason. People tend to love this movie. It does have a cult following, and if you haven't seen it, you should absolutely check it out. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Shadow of the Vampire, and Shadow of the Vampire is a very different take on the vampire mythology. A very original, very fresh movie, not like any other vampire movie you've ever seen. And if you haven't seen it, the movie is about the making of the classic vampire movie Nosferatu, which was done about 100 years ago. And it stars John Malkovich as F.W. Murnau, the director, and Willem Dafoe as Max Schreck, the actor who played the Count, Count Orlok, the titular Nosferatu. And the premise is that the Count, Max Schreck, is actually a real vampire who has been cast in this movie to make a movie about vampires. It is both original and hilarious. It is an absolutely it's a gem of a movie. It's such a neat idea. This concept is based on kind of an urban legend myth that Max Schreck was such a weird actor in real life and acted so strange that people thought he might actually really be the vampire that he was playing on screen. So they took that concept and made a movie out of it, like as if he was actually a real vampire. And it's brilliant. It's so fun and funny and terrifying and interesting. It's not really a scary movie per se, and it's not really an out and out comedy either. It's really kind of mostly like a drama. And so the pacing can be a little bit challenging for especially maybe newer, younger viewers. It's not an action-packed movie, and there's not a lot of like horror stuff in it. But it's really fascinating. And if you are a fan of the Nosferatu movie, this movie you're going to eat it up with a spoon. It's absolutely it's just so clever. And Willem Dafoe, I think everybody still knows Willem Dafoe. He's still doing great work to this day. He has a legion of fans, multiple generations. He is so great here. He's so off-putting and hilariously bizarre and creepy. He just nails it. He's almost unrecognizable in the makeup. And of course, John Malkovich always gives a great performance. He's wonderfully over the top here. And the two of them and their dialogue and their kind of their exchanges really hits for me. This is again a movie that it almost doesn't even feel like a vampire movie. That's how off the beaten path it is as a vampire movie, and that's what I love about it. I said at the beginning of the video that there's so many different vampire stories to tell. There's such a rich mythology. There's so many different ways to explore it, and you can do so many different things with it. This one is wholly unique to me. I don't know of any other vampire movie that has done something like this, and if there is one, let me know in the comments below. If I'm forgetting something or if I just don't know about it, leave it in the comments because I definitely want to check it out. But this movie, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a must see. This is one that's kind of for the advanced people. If you have a love for like old old movies, like especially if you have a love for Nosferatu, but if you have a love for old filmmaking, or if you just like kind of meta takes on things, then this movie might hit for you. But it's a really, really original. That's the word I keep using over and over again. It's just a fresh, original take on vampires, and I absolutely love it. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to leave you with today is a movie called Jacob's Wife, which is a rather recent movie, came out in 2021, and is maybe the most recent movie that we've got in the syllabus. And I kind of squeezed it on because I liked it that much. If you're not familiar with the movie stars Barbara Crampton as the wife of a minister who is unhappy. She's feeling neglected. She's getting older, and her husband doesn't seem to have much interest in her, and she's just dissatisfied. And then one day, while contemplating having an affair, she gets attacked by a vampire and gets changed into a vampire, and it gives her a new lease on life and a new attitude. And the question becomes, how can she fit into this marriage and this old life with her newfound power? It's going to get complicated and it's going to get messy, but I won't go into it too much because the movie is a gem. I really, really liked Jacob's Wife. And this is why I've kind of squeezed it onto the syllabus. I kind of had to, or it's not on the syllabus proper, it's an extra credit, but I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell you guys about it in case you hadn't heard about it because I love it. I love Barbara Crampton. Horror fans love Barbara Crampton. She's done so much great work over the years, and she dropped out for a little while. She kind of retired for a while, and then she came back with Your Next, which we talked about. But she's fantastic here. She's the star of this movie, and she is absolutely fantastic here. She carries this movie. It also stars Larry Fessenden, who's also great in this. The movie is a blast. It's a neat take. Again, I'm enjoying the fresh takes on things. This is kind of like a weird feminism meets patriarchy type movie, but it's not a heavy-handed message movie at all. It's just the idea of a woman who's kind of in a stereotypical, patriarchal marriage, quite literally, with a minister and everything like that. It's she's kind of like your typical housewife, and then she wants something more, and then she gets something more with this vampire thing, and the vampire becomes analogous to her desire to break out and be something more and be her own person, and it works really really well, and it's got good scares and gore in it too, and it's got a really clever, interesting story. Got a great ending. I really, really liked this movie. This movie surprised me. It had gotten a lot of buzz, and so my expectations were kind of high when I finally checked it out, and I was not let down. It met my expectations. So if you haven't checked it out yet, definitely recommend it. It's a wonderful story. It's a fantastic performance. It's very well made, and it's definitely one that deserves your time. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. So that's going to do it for this week's video. I was so excited to get to vampires. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and for a number of reasons had to push it out, push it out. We finally got to it, and I couldn't be more happy because I love these movies. I love vampire movies in general, and these ones I think are some of the best you could check out. So again, if you haven't seen any of them, do yourself a favor, go and check them out. If you've got vampire suggestions of your own, drop them in the comments for us, because A, if I haven't seen them, I'm going to want to know about them. I want to check them out. And B, I know I didn't get to anywhere near all the good movies that are out there. Now, like I said before, I'll be talking about vampire movies and other subgenres because I love them and I can find ways to squeeze them in. I will. And you've seen me do it a few times already, and I'll be doing it in the future. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't drop them in the comments anyways. Drop them in there for us to know about. Suggest the movies that you think are great vampire movies. Let us know if there's any hidden gems that you know about. But share the vampire love, because I love vampires. Lots of people love vampires. I bet there's a lot of you that love vampires. Let's keep the discussion going in the comments, because there's a lot of stuff to cover. There's a lot of stuff to love. Thanks very much for your attention this week, and thanks for hanging out. And until next week, class dismissed.